Hi and welcome back. This is Police Stories Podcast, episode 36. This is a series of short stories about my 28-year career in the UK police force across 3 different forces and various different specialisms, one of which we're on now, which is, if you've been listening, is all about firearms work, and we've dealt with quite a bit last week. There's no light subjects in firearms, of course, but last week was suicide bombers and a few of the moral issues around pulling the trigger, etc. A difficult subject for sure. But this week we're going to move on to something a bit different. Thanks for downloads, by the way. Fantastic week on downloads again. It just keeps growing, which is really good, so thank you. And this week we're going to talk about, if you remember, I'd become a specialist firearms officer. I'd done the extra course that entailed, so now I was doing a lot of plain clothes work, lots of support to various agencies, as well as our own kind of pre-planned work, which centred a lot around arresting, probably, the most violent, most aggressive, kind of baddest people, really. Or also, and this is one of the things we'll talk about today, if evidence was believed it was going to be lost, unless the arrest was made very, very quickly. And you'll see in a bit how we achieved that. But I'd been an SFO for about 2 years at this point, and it was decided that I was going to be sent off to do the intervention course. Now, the intervention, if you look on the profile picture of the podcast, you'll kind of see the men in black there. One of those is me. I'm the one looking backwards, but it's all, kind of lots of ballistic armour and men in black and, ballistic helmets. But it's all about sort of entering houses rapidly with the use of stun grenades. And normally to gain that element of surprise, both to protect the officers going in and also potentially any, would-be victims inside. Because if you're doing that, like I say, you're going in to get a particularly bad person, and ultimately probably trying to end a siege and maybe rescue, somebody who's being held hostage inside. Not always, but as we'll hear in a bit. But it's decided I'd go off to do this course. Now, certainly this course was quite well sought after. You had to get to a decent level of competence in terms of your training and, your shooting skills, and just generally be, I think, relatively well thought of at this point, and a sort of a trusted hand, if you like. So presumably I was one of those by then. And normally the course was run in-house. I think it was 2 weeks long. It was normally run in-house by my own force, with my own instructors, But every now and then we would do training with neighbouring forces and also different forces altogether. And the whole idea of that is, and I think I spoke about it last week, on the dive team we did it as well. It's all about knowing how your other colleagues in other forces work, because you might see something that's a really good idea and you take it back with you, so we all develop from it. And equally, if you're ever called upon to work with each other, you need to know how each other's works. So I actually went to the neighbouring force to do my intervention course with a friend of mine, a colleague, who ended up becoming a firearms instructor himself. And it was a really, really good course. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Lots of very fast shooting. Lots of shooting on the move, because generally, you're planted, as they say, you're standing still when you take your shots. But intervention is very fast moving, so we did a lot of work around shooting on the move, i.e. walking forward, never running, but certainly walking forward and taking shots at that point. You didn't have a chance, an opportunity to stop, stand still, get a proper sight picture and all the rest of it. So a lot of it was snap shooting, instinctive shooting, very quick shooting, which, from my point of view, very, very enjoyable. And lots of work with stun grenades, lots of ladder work, because when you go into a house, you generally don't sort of pile in through the front door in the obvious way. You want multiple entry points all simultaneously. You're totally looking at this shock and awe for that house. So, yes, some people might go through the front door, but some will go through the lounge window. Some will go through a rear second floor bathroom window, hence there being ladders. And we use a lot of assault ladders, which are, similar to the ladder you've probably got in your shed, but the difference is they're wider. They could be maybe 5 or 6 rungs width, so you could actually have 5 or 6 officers standing sort of shoulder to shoulder with each other. And then also on the outside of the ladder itself would be an extra rung at various places, and that was there so that one officer normally would be designated as the sort of stun grenade person, and he or she would stand on that outer rung, and once the window was smashed would be feeding stun grenades into the window while the team went up and passed him or her on the middle rungs of the ladder, if that makes sense. So you imagine this ladder, that's like 4 or 5 rungs wide, so lots of people can go up and down it, but these 1 or 2 on the outside, on these outer rungs, can stay stable, and they can either be providing like I say, feeding stun grenades in, or possibly arm cover as well. So one might be smashing the window and feeding in stun grenades, another one might have arm cover on the room, so that in that second it takes for someone to get through, the team to get through that broken window, there is arm cover on that room. So should the bad guy or girl come out, and present a threat, then they could be dealt with. But yeah, course was brilliant. And I went up to North Wales. There's a killing house up there. I think that's what the military call it. Certainly it's probably not the best name from a police point of view, but that's what it is effectively. It's a series of buildings that you can train at, and they have kind of replaceable windows, replaceable doors, window frames and things like that. So you can basically smash them up a bit, really, is what it comes down to. And also that is where we looked at something called explosive method of entry. So when you see the guys and girls on the telly, hitting a door, the big red key, as they like to say, or an enforcer, to give it its proper name, that is called MOE, method of entry. That's what all the sort of gaining entry to that is. And it started off as, way back it used to be your foot, but many bad backs later, we don't tend to kick indoors. I mean, there might still be a case for it, depending on how urgent it is, but generally you don't kick indoors now. You'd use some sort of apparatus. So you've got, the enforcer, you've got maybe a hoolie bar, which we used a lot, which is like a massive crowbar effectively that's about 3 or 4 foot long with a big spike on one end. So you can use it for sort of jemmying windows open and things, but also if you hit windows with a spike, you can shatter them. Really good bit of kit, and we carried that a lot. There's also all sorts of things, hydraulic frame spreaders that would sort of, when you press a button, if you had an electric one that was in a pack, it would spread the frame, and then the lock would just pop out on the door, so you could pretty much open the door just by pushing it with your hand. And nowadays, and I never use them, but when you look going forward, you see people now using, sort of petrol-driven disc cutters and chainsaws I've seen, and all sorts. And method of entry actually used on intervention on the course I was on. We also used shotguns, very, very cut down, short barreled shotguns, specifically designed for the role. And they had Hatton rounds in, which is basically powdered lead set in a wax. And it's fired at hinges, obviously very, very hard, and then it would blow hinges off doors, and that would enable you to push them in. And yeah, we did a lot of work with the explosive method entry, which was just coming to the fore at the time, come from the military really, but it's effectively detonation cord that's put around sheets of plywood that are held up against, kind of windows or doors, etc. And when they detonate, the whole thing just kind of implodes, allowing you a way in. So yeah, it was a thoroughly good course, really enjoyed it, managed to pass it, which was handy. It was definitely a pass or fail, because you may not have been up to the standard, but and also there was a certain amount of pressure on us, because it was a neighbouring force. We wanted to give a good account of ourselves. We didn't want the people from this force thinking that ours was no good, so we wanted to represent them, and I think we did a reasonably good job of that. So, and in fact we went on to do various jobs with them in the future, and in fact the job we're going to talk about now is one of those. So there wasn't really an on-call system as such for when there was a big job happened overnight. If everyone was asleep, obviously there was always a armed cover within my force, but if it was a big job, then they would have to call out extra officers, more resources would be required. So basically it'd be a bit of a ring round, and if you knew that you were out drinking, or if you're away on holiday or something, you'd let the kind of duty sergeant know, perhaps, so they wouldn't ring you. And equally, there may well be people that said, I am free tonight, so if something happens, then give us a call, kind of thing. There was only about 30 people on the team in total that were SFOs. I think that's about right. And so it was potluck really, whether you got a call or not. And on this occasion, sure enough, quite late, it was about 11 o'clock, I think, on midnight, got a call from work. I was meant to be days off. And they said, can you come into the office? You know, there's a job on. And they don't tell you any more than that. You've got to go in. So I had about half an hour drive in. And quite often when you get there, there'd be, normally if they called in another sort of car's worth, it would be three more cops there. You know, that's what you'd expect to see if there was a job. And maybe if it was a bigger job that needed, you know, it's a big property, it needed a lot of people to contain it or something, it might have been, you know, 6 officers. But that was pretty unusual, to be honest. It was generally 3 that were in there. So on this particular occasion, when I got into the car park at work, half an hour drive to work, got there, the car park was virtually full. You know, and there's quite a few spaces. So I was thinking, that's strange. You know, I wonder what's going on. So basically, you know, we virtually always worked in our own force. We did do some mutual aid, helping other forces out, but again, that was quite unusual. But when we got to the office, we were basically split off into different cars and vans and pretty much everything we had, and just told to get on the van or the car, you know, and that was it. You know, off we popped, basically. We're going off to a job. We knew nothing about it. We'd armed up first, so we were all armed, and we all had full intervention. You know, we'd had the whispers that it was going to be an intervention, which was quite exciting because I can't remember if I'd done one at that point. I don't think I had. This was probably my first one. So, yeah, you know, I won't lie, I was definitely a little bit excited, you know, because I was thinking, wow, you know, this is going to be a big job, because quite often an intervention wouldn't be authorised by the bosses, you know, because it was so aggressive, it was so overt, it was such a show of strength, you know, it was about as close to the military as the police could get, you know, so invariably they would try and come up with another tactic prior to using it. But sometimes, you know, that just isn't going to happen. So off we went, and we were told that we were going to the neighbouring force, mutual aid. We were armed up and we'd be briefed when we got there. So, of course, you can imagine it was about a 2-hour trip or something. And so there was lots and lots of, you know, sort of supposition on the way. Oh, what are we doing? You know, where are we going? And what are we going to do when we get there? And how big's the job? And what is it? You know, and all these sorts of things, which sometimes is not that helpful, because you can kind of wind yourself up thinking it's going to be one thing and it's not. But anyway, when we got there, and I'd been to this force before, because it was the force actually that I'd done my intervention course in, so I knew the headquarters and I knew the place quite well. And we were showing up to a briefing room, and normally when you had a briefing from an officer, it would be, you know, maybe a chief inspector, perhaps a superintendent, something like that, if it was a bigger job. You know, it was rarely above that. But while we were in this big sort of auditorium, so there was probably 50 guys in the room, of which 20 odd were ours, the ACC, the Assistant Chief Constable from this force, came in. So that was a bit of an eye-opener, because, you know, it's very rare for a senior officer like that to give you a briefing at a job. You know, they're very much management level, and, you know, they're all about, you know, kind of resources and managing people and cars and things like that, as opposed to perhaps operational policing, you know. So, yeah, we got this briefing anyway, and it was a really nasty job. What had happened was, and it had been going on for, they didn't know exactly how long, but certainly a year it had been going on in the local area to where I was then. Basically, a number of Indians had been targeted. And now the local Indians were known, as I believe a lot of Indians do, you know, gold jewellery is really important to them. It's part of their culture. And so they generally have a lot of it, you know, and that's quite well known. So in the past, I'd done jobs where on low-level robberies and things, you know, Indians had been specifically targeted because they had, you know, a lot of gold jewellery, which obviously is very valuable. And particularly at the time, I think, you know how gold prices fluctuate. I think gold at the time was absolutely through the roof. You know, we're talking, this is over 20 years ago, but so it was, you know, any sort of gold was worth something. And yeah, large amounts were very quickly into the sort of hundreds of thousands. And what had been happening was a really nasty job. One of the local kind of wannabe gangsters, I guess you'd call him, in the area had been targeting young Indian boys of the very sort of rich and wealthy families from that area, knowing that the families that they came from were not only very well off, but also possessed a lot of gold. And of course, the thing with gold is, a lot of the time it's not traceable, and of course it can be melted down, so it's been the sort of currency of choice for bad guys throughout, certainly the recent history, because it's not like, cash that's got serial numbers or whatever. It's firstly, if it's plain gold, it's not that identifiable, and certainly if you've got the contacts, you can get it melted down, and it's still worth something, a lot, obviously. So what happened was, he'd been going around targeting the young boys from these families when they were out and about in the town centres, and a lot of these guys weren't that subtle, they had a bit of money, so they were driving like, big powerful cars, BMWs, Mercedes, etc., all lowered, with neon lights and sort of, so they did kind of stand out a bit, and they were being targeted when they were off by themselves. They were being followed off, and people were doing things like, pretending to break down in front of them, or, pretending to have a puncture or something like that, and stopping in front of them. And the moment that the car in front had stopped them, it was a bit like a TPAC, really, a tactical pursuit and containment that the police would do. The moment they were stopped, another car would come right up behind them and block them in. And then, some seriously heavy guys, would be out of that car, opening the door and dragging them out and basically kidnapping them, and they were getting shoved into vans or into the backs of cars and things, by the heavy mob, effectively. It is the sort of stuff, you see and hear about on the telly, but it was real. So these young lads, who were kind of, late teens, early 20s, were taken off to remote locations, and they were effectively tortured. All sorts of really, really unpleasant things happened to them. They were burnt with cigarettes. They had one that particularly sort of stood out, their sort of MO, their modus operandi, how they did it was they used to use pool cues and actually shove pool cues up their backsides of these young lads, while, burning them with cigarettes and irons. I mean, it was really sadistic, horrible torture, and what they were doing is, while all this was going on, they were filming it on mobile phones or, video cameras or whatever format it was. I think they used several. And they were then sending them anonymously to the families and basically saying, we've got your boy. We know you've got, particularly, I think it was tied in a lot with when the weddings were. So when there was a big Indian wedding, they knew, the criminals knew that a lot of extra gold would be coming in to the area by visiting family, so there was even more sort of gold available. And they're basically saying, unless you give us, X amount of gold or all the gold you've got, or a serious amount of gold, we're going to continue to do this to your boy. And also, if you report it to the police, then, you'll never see him again. I mean, they're really, really nasty stuff. And of course, from the family's point of view, there was an awful lot of embarrassment. They knew what had happened to their sons. And of course, no one wanted to speak about it. So it went on for some time. Like I say, I'm pretty sure it was over a year before anyone eventually reported it to the police, because they were just too embarrassed for their family and for their sons. But this guy had made a lot of money. We're talking into the millions, I think it ended up as being, by doing this. But he was very cocky. He had a really big house. He had like massive electric gates. It was really secure. He had kind of high walls all around. And he boasted that the police would never get into his house. They just, they couldn't get through. Well, that was a big mistake, I can tell you, because we like a challenge. And also, he'd made it clear to other people, we were obviously using what we call CHISs, which is covert human intelligence sources. Some people would call them grasses, snouts, whatever. Basically, an informant, a police informant, was obviously on the inside or close to this guy, and they were letting us know that he'd made it very clear, and I think he was sort of freely talking about it when he was out and about with people, that all the evidence of these offences, this horrible torture that was filmed on phones, I think mainly, was stored in a microwave at home. And his intention was that while the police were trying to, bash down his door and not getting very far because he had it reinforced and he had, security grills up and, like I say, these massive gates. Remember the massive gates because they'll come in later. while the police were sort of hammering away trying to get in, he would just calmly go down to his microwave and turn his microwave on. And the thinking was, from his point of view, that all those phones would be, you know, irreparably damaged, and so would all the memory and anything that was held on those devices, so that all the evidence would be lost. And he was, you know, very cocky that he would then get away with it because he felt that no one would ever testify against him. So, unbeknown to me and to most of my team, I think 3 of the instructors from our force had, you know, found out about this job some weeks before, and basically had been asked to plan the job and how to get in, so that when we went down there on this night, this was the first most of us, including me, knew about it. But the plans were in place so that we were ready to go. So we had this briefing off the ACC that told us all about what was going on, and then he said, and now we're going to move into the attack phase. You know, we're ready to arrest, and we think we've come up with a plan of how we can get into that address quite quickly, which we were kind of intrigued about, because we'd already had, you know, seen the pictures and the footage of the address, and sure enough, it was, you know, proper Fort Knox. It was, it looked very, very secure. So, and the ACC signed off by saying, and your guys, your instructors, you know, and he named them, said, really good guys, they've come up with a fantastic idea. He said, I'm not sure it's ever been done before in policing, so this could be a first. And of course, now we were like, what the hell have they come up with? You know, this sounds brilliant. So what they'd come up with was, one of the instructors, or certainly somebody on the team, had a lot of rural links and links with farmers. In fact, I think his family either was farmers, or he'd come from farmers, or they knew farmers very well, or something like that. And he'd done in his younger days a fair bit of driving of tractors and things. So he'd put up the idea that, why don't we use a tractor to break down these gates? And in fact, a tractor with the 2 spikes fitted to the front, and I think they normally use them for jabbing the big round hay bales, you know, and lifting them up. The intention was that we were going to, or he was going to drive this tractor up to the front gates, spike the front gates, and then raise the prongs and basically rip the gates from their hinges, or at least lift them enough for us to get in. And, you know, we were all pretty fit guys, so he only had to lift them kind of, you know, 2 or 3 feet, and we'd be under them and in. And I mean, it just blew us away. We were like, wow, this sounds, you know, crazy, but yeah, maybe it'll work, you know. And it was the only way, realistically, we were going to get into there quite quickly. So all the planning was done. That was the fantastic thing from our point of view. They'd already planned all this out. We literally just had to get kitted up. We were assigned into our different teams. My role was to go round to the rear of the premises, and then one of our number 3s, which was, everyone got numbered off depending on what your role was, but a number 3 was an MOE. They were the specialists that were going to get us in. We'd identified that the rear doors were sort of big patio glass doors, and that a hoolie bar was going to be spiked into these doors. Now, because it's this kind of shatterproof glass that doesn't go into big shards that's going to cut you if there's an accident, you can basically, once they're shattered, you know, once they're hit with a spike, you can just walk straight through them, and it leaves this sort of comedy human outline in the glass. It takes a little bit of nerve to do it, but once you've done it a few times, you know, you get confident that it's okay. So that number 3's role was firstly to spike the glass, and secondly, and this might sound a bit weird, but everyone that then entered the property and went past him, he literally would put his hand on their shoulder for a second and just say, wait, wait, wait. You know, so each person that passed him, he just briefly touched them for a second, split second on the shoulder, and just said, wait, or slow, you know, something like that. And the idea was that, you can imagine your testosterone and your kind of, you know, adrenaline is through the roof at this point. And to do your job, you have to be able to, you know, keep control of yourself, but also stay incredibly focused, you know, laser focused for a job like this. It was decided that we wouldn't use stun grenades. I think there was some concern there might have been children in the house, and you just can't use stun grenades around kids. Well, or it's not ideal. I mean, there's probably circumstances you would, but for whatever reason, well, that was the reason, you know, it was decided we wouldn't use stun grenades on this occasion. So, and our main role for being used was to prevent him basically destroying all that evidence on those phones to get in quickly. So we had floor plans of the house, we had the blueprints, we knew the layout, we'd marked out in the backyard with tape, you know, about how the property was. So we knew, you know, kind of, right, I go in through that back door, I kind of turn left, I go up the stairs, and there's a bathroom, you know, and my job is to cover that bathroom or clear that bathroom, basically. Other people had bedrooms, and people had cupboards, and, you know, the kitchen and the lounge and all that. So bearing in mind now, time was, I think it was kind of, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I think we intended to hit the door or the gates at about 3 a.m. Now, bearing in mind, we'd brought a tractor with us. I didn't know this at this point because it was off the back of our convoy, but we had a full-on, monster green tractor with us on a low loader, and that was being unloaded nearby. It was quite near to a big shopping centre, this place, and they'd unloaded it, and the driver, our guy, was sat with it waiting, and he was within about kind of 5 minutes of the address. So what happened was we all got kitted up, we got assigned our roles, and we headed out to the address, and we stacked up, we got the tractor down, and we basically followed the tractor down. We got it to the end of the street where the house was, and then we had people up and outside, literally standing outside the house, because one thing you don't want to do is get this wrong. You really don't want to go and rip Mrs. Miggins' gate off the hinges, with your tractor, and then she goes, "Oh, do you want so-and-so? No, he's next door," It has happened, or probably not with a tractor before, so... so sure enough, most bizarre scene, 3 o'clock in the morning, obviously pitch black still. There's 20 guys all dressed in full intervention kit. So we've got, the ballistic helmets on, all in black, dripping with kind of guns, and fairly G'd up, but trying to hold it together. And off it goes, this tractor goes chundling down the road, and we're all stacked behind it, and we're just kind of walking pace behind it very slowly, just taking our time and winding our way down the road. And if I remember right, the road was straight initially, and then there was a bend, and then the house we were going to attack was just around the corner, so it was quite good. It afforded us a decent, run up at this house without being seen. So that's what we did. Off we go, and, sight to behold, we turn the corner. Sure enough, our man in the tractor turns into the gates, put the prongs in, and rips them up, and they came off their hinges. They both lifted up. Now, it wasn't perfect. They didn't come completely so you could just stroll in, but they did enough, and they came up about 3 or 4 feet, and there was a decent gap for us to get underneath. So it wasn't like we had to belly crawl or anything underneath it. So we were able just to stoop down, get under these gates. But can you imagine, in this quiet residential, quite posh area, 3 o'clock in the morning, and crash, tractor's gone smashed into these gates, he's ripped off the hinges, and we've zipped around the back, we've run around the back, and other people have gone, up ladders on the front. Other people have gone up ladders at the back, because, as I say, you're coming in at multiple floors, at multiple entry points all at once with this, shock and awe is the distraction plan, and all the windows are going in, all the windows are getting spiked. So we're not using stun, but we are smashing every window we can get our hands on, basically, because it's, we just want this person to be completely kind of thrown inside. So sure enough, I came around the back, and I think there's about half a dozen of us going in through the rear patio doors. Number 3 had spiked it with a hoolie bar, so now you're left with this shattered glass but stays in place, and the comedy human shape in it as we all walk through. And sure enough, as I pass number 3, he just touches me on the shoulder and just says, "Slow." And it just takes that second for you to go, okay, no problems. This is fast, but we're not out of control here. We're keeping it together. And yeah, as I've already said, I had the glamorous job of clearing the bathroom. So, and I think it was actually on the ground floor, but I knew where I was going because we'd looked at the floor plan, so we knew exactly where we were going. So I went in through the doors, and so obviously weapons were up. I was in the high position, so the weapon was in my shoulder, but a safety catch on fire, but pointing slightly to the ground. In fact, I'm trying to think myself now. Yes, I was in that position actually. So it was in a high port position. So safety catch on safe, finger off trigger, and then moving forward, but ready to fire should there be a threat. And then I made my way to the bathroom and cleared it. And you can imagine it took me a good 10 seconds to clear this tiny bathroom and establish that there was no one in it. But the beauty was, and I think we worked out the timings on it, it was something like 35 seconds after the front gates being ripped up by the tractor, to 2 of our guys being at the foot of the bed of the main bad guy. He was in bed with his wife, and he basically stirred slowly and woke up with all the sound of smashing glass and utter chaos to find 2 guys at the foot of his bed pointing MP5s at him, and he never got anywhere near that microwave, I can tell you. And it was a fantastic job, it was a really good job. It's the sort of thing you join the police for, and certainly, if you have to think of an intervention, it's about as good as it gets, to be honest with you. And the tractor just was the icing on the cake. I don't know if that's ever happened before in British policing. Whether it'll ever happen again, I don't know. But fantastic job to be involved in. So they recovered all the evidence. The guy got a really big sentence at court, because obviously what he'd done was horrendous, and I'm sure there was something like 10 or 20 victims. There was a lot of people involved. So it was a brilliant job. Thoroughly enjoyed that one, and one definitely to be remembered. So I hope you found that interesting. A little insight into intervention and the sort of rapid entry type armed stuff. We'll be back next week with some more. In the meantime, you take it easy, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers. Bye.